It's so good to see everybody. All right, good evening and welcome to the Workers Strike Back New York City launch. Thank you so much for coming. And a big thank you to our hosts at BMCC, which is of course part of CUNY City University in New York, a true New York City institution, the People's University. And we have a jam-packed program tonight. It's my pleasure to guide us through the excitement. My name is Dan Krupp. I'm a longtime member of Socialist Alternative and the president of the New York City Council Union, which is called the Association of Legislative Employees. We are the largest union of legislative workers in the country and are in solidarity with all of the workers all across the country, from Oregon to Washington, D.C. to Albany. Lots of legislative workers organizing, all part of a wave, a really exciting wave of organizing that we're going to talk about tonight. So just to briefly frame what brings us all here tonight, we've seen in the past couple of years some historic attacks on workers, and it didn't start with the Trump administration. It's ongoing through the Biden administration and preceded the Trump administration. But lately, let's just kind of quickly review what we've seen that really stands out. A couple of things. Of course, there have been historic attacks on the right to strike. So the recent Glacier Northwest decision, incredibly concerning coming out of the Supreme Court, trying to handcuff private sector unions, of course public sector unions, of which I'm in one. You know, if you're in professional staff Congress organizing here at CUNY, you're handcuffed by the Taylor Law, which says we as public sector workers cannot strike. A terrible thing that we've got to overturn. Of course, there's been a cascade of oppressive anti-trans legislation going on across this country. And you can't stand up here and talk about anything without talking about, of course, what has been happening the past 48, 72 hours, not just in New York, but across so much of the East Coast, the terrible wildfire smoke. That's an unmistakable reminder of climate change's forward march. And the last thing I wanted to kind of lift up, is the close of the legislative session in Albany. We all know that New York is in a housing crisis. We've been in a housing crisis, but it's probably the worst it's ever been. To rent the average apartment in New York City, you need to earn $134,000 in order for that apartment to be affordable. Now, affordable means 30% of your income is still going to rent, which is a huge amount. So just those eye-watering figures, and we know what the result of unaffordability has been in New York. We've seen a huge exodus of people of color, the stampede of gentrification, and of course, the worst record homelessness levels ever in New York City. Over 80,000 people sleeping in shelter. Of course, part of that is the migrant crisis that our federal government has so deeply failed to do the right thing on. All of this as Mayor Adams is adding nearly $2 million to the New York City Police Department budget this year. So we know whether it's workers' rights, whether it's trans rights, whether it's fighting back against the police state, there are many ways that we need to unite our movements and fight. So, for not just today, but for many decades, there have been no answers from the corporate political parties to these key questions of our time: housing, climate change, foreign policy. I could go on and on. However, hope is alive. We are seeing a new surge of interest in unions and workplace organizing. Gallup showed last year 71% of Americans approve of labor unions, which is the highest approval since 1965. And in fact, clear majorities across all political parties and those who say they have no political party. Majorities of Republicans approve of labor unions, and of course, Democrats and independents as well. 2021 saw the number of new union members increase by almost 7%, which was the largest increase in union membership since the year 2000. My union, the Association of Legislative Employees, is a small part of that wave. We are seeing workers organizing, of course, from Amazon to Starbucks, and I'm really excited to hear our speakers from Amazon tonight, the workers from Amazon. Amazon to Starbucks to legal defense attorneys and academic workers. So one thing is true: if history is any guide, it's going to take a united mass struggle with clear demands to win better conditions for working people. And so what is Workers Strike Back? That's what's bringing us here tonight. It was launched by Socialist Alternative and our incredible council member, Kshama Sawant in Seattle, who I'm very thrilled is here tonight. I don't get to do the intro for Kshama, but if I did, it would be very long. Workers Strike Back is an independent movement, organizing in our workplaces and on the streets against the bosses and their political servants. And that's why Workers Strike Back is organizing around 5 key demands: for a real raise for working people, for good union jobs for all, for an end to racism, sexism, and all forms of oppression, for better housing and healthcare, and for a new party that fights for and accountable to working people. And so far, Workers Strike Back has provided support for Amazon workers in motion unionizing. They'll be speaking later, as I mentioned. We held a nationwide Glacier Week of Action to defend the right to strike. We've been on the picket line with the Writers Guild of America. Super excited to have a speaker from WGA tonight. They've been holding it down now several weeks. Very impressive strike. Really impressive strike. And everybody's with you. Nobody wants to read a chat GPT generated sitcom. You could write a sitcom about that. The PCC grocery workers we've stood with in Seattle, Tugsah workers in Philly, the LA teacher strike, my union at City Hall. I could go on. There are lots more unions that Workers Strike Back has really been trying to pull together. Many, ordinary folks who care about workers' rights to come together on the picket line or wherever we're needed. You can see some of these images from the slideshow here, giving just a taste of what we've been up to. So, what's the plan for tonight? We're going to hear from a bunch of people who are fighting for better working and living conditions within their unions, from workers who are fighting for unions in their workplaces, and leaders in the fight against the corporate political establishment. At the end of the event, there'll be plenty of time to discuss with Workers Strike Back organizers. You can check out our shirts, and you can buy one at the end, too. Ultimately, we want workers in this room to get involved with Workers Strike Back. How many folks here, just as a sense, put up your hand, how many folks here are in a union? Wow, look around. That's pretty impressive. How many folks here are organizing a union? Okay, got a couple of hands, so I feel like, yeah. And we all know how hard that is. Exciting, fun, but it is hard work. So ultimately, we're here because we want to get organized to rebuild a fighting labor movement. So are you excited? Are you ready? All right. So let's keep that excitement and that love going in this room. We're going to get started first with a message from Ralph Nader. So I'm going to do a little intro of Ralph right now. He's not with us, don't get too excited. But he did record as a supporter of Workers Strike Back, a special message just for us. So I'm really excited. So I will, introduce, of course, who's Ralph Nader, 4-time presidential candidate. He garnered 3 million votes on 2 of those occasions. He's an attorney, he's an activist, the accomplished author of over 2 dozen books. And he's turning 90 next February, so give it up for doing all that. He spent a lifetime on issues of consumer protection, environmentalism, and government reform. He's best known for his book, Unsafe at Any Speed, which criticized the auto industry for its terrible safety record and led to national reform. He's been a vocal critic of corporate greed and government corruption, and founded Public Citizen, which is a consumer advocacy group, in 1971. A couple of good Ralph Nader quotes that I found that I kind of liked. So of course Ralph Nader faced huge attacks after the 2000 election. Al Gore had a terribly uninspiring campaign. As we all know, the Supreme Court rigged the Florida vote count, handing it over to Bush. And Nader, though, throughout all of this was unrepentant. He called his critics, quote, well-intentioned cowards, whom he found unforgivably tolerant of a poisoned system in which both major candidates danced on strings controlled by corporate paymasters. Yeah. Okay, that resonates. That's still slaps. So, and then I like this one. He said, in response to those who say, well, politics, probably here's it. Politics is the art of compromise. If only we had more compromise in American politics. Nader said this. He said, politics is the art of transforming leadership. And a transforming leader is a person who says, this is the right thing to do, and I'm going to help mobilize the American people to counteract the special interests who stand in the way. All right? So with no further ado, here's a message to Workers Strike Back from Ralph Nader.
Movement. Thank you for giving me a few minutes to speak with you. Before we get into the details, I think every movement has got to think big and keep its feet on the ground. That means you pursue the immediate justice of your cause, but you always think bigger. In the context of Amazon, it's not only that you want more safety and more livable wage. The bigger picture is, why do you have to be part of a company that is destroying small business, hollowing out Main Street community, and producing things that aren't very good for people in terms of what they're distributing? So thinking big means that we should have a country where corporations are subordinated to human beings. They should not have equal rights under the Constitution. That was a judge-made decision way back. There is no mention of corporation or company in the Constitution. It only deals with we the people and uses the word person. Now they're trying to make corporations into persons. That is reversible. It can be done in a number of ways, and it's very important for worker movements to keep reading and thinking and talking about the bigger issues. Why don't workers reign over the economy? Why aren't there more worker-owned businesses? Why do you have better worker compensation? Why don't you have better worker pensions? Why don't you have better worker voice on the board of directors? Now, Councilwoman Sawant achieved quite a bit in Seattle by being firm, informed, determined, and courageous. And those are the qualities for success for workers. Now, technique number one, always connect with consumer movements that relate to the company you're trying to organize. Consumer groups are aligned with labor groups. That's how we got the legislation in the 60s and 70s. The consumer groups worked with the unions, and the unions worked with the consumers. So keep that in mind. The second is, a function of worker improvement is class consciousness. Class has produced so many of the bad things in this country. The corporations starting out with cotton plantations and slavery and underpaying women and keeping women out of the workplace, and on to the day now where they still discriminate in the marketplace against women, and of course there are all kinds of discrimination against minority workers in healthcare, redlining, all kinds of other areas. So class consciousness is extremely important as part of the discussion and the movement. Next thing I want to say is try to connect with law school clinics and law professors. They'll provide pro bono, free legal advice. Also keep everything that you do, ask yourself, for broad reform, where do we have to go? It's either Congress and state legislatures or local city council. So what you want to do is demonstrate in front of the local office of your senator, 2 senators and representatives. That sends a message back to Washington. They see the workers have a pulse. They see the workers are going to connect them with voting in November. So always connect all your effort to focus for the longer term on changing the Congress and the state and local legislators, because they're not on your side for the most part. A majority are not on your side, especially for radical labor law reform. We have the most anti-union, anti-worker laws in the Western world. The worst one was passed in 1947. It's called the Taft-Hartley Law. It's the worst handcuffs on union organizing you can imagine. And the AFL-CIO has never made it a top priority, nor did the Democratic Party, since 1947. Can you imagine that? So learn about it, learn how it restricts workers, helping workers to form unions, learn how the 1947 Congress handcuffed the people in 2023 and get it repealed. Repeal Taft-Hartley should be one of your slogans. And complete labor law reform to strengthen the power of workers, whether or not they are unionized. Now, those are the points, and very good to have solidarity. One way to get solidarity is to agree ahead of time what your objective is, so that the opposition corporations do not divide and rule you. They know how to do that. They know how to co-opt, divide, and rule. But if you start with a firm demand and stick with it, you're not asking for all that much. Remember, always publicize how much the boss is making. If there are workers trying to organize Apple stores, they're making 20 bucks an hour or whatever now, working without stopping. It's so busy. They should always highlight that last year, Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, made $833 a minute on a 40-hour week, not counting benefits, insurance, all kinds of perks and so forth. $833 a minute. You gotta always put the top boss's pay on the table when you're talking with the press, etc. So always remember, the big picture is the big picture that will get the most attention to your cause once you pursue it seriously. Good luck to you. And keep reading and thinking. That's essential to any justice movement.
Excellent. That was awesome. Thank you so much for giving a little, applause. We'll bottle that up and send that to him wherever he is tonight. I was very moved by one particular thing that Ralph said, which was these sort of rhetorical questions. He said, why don't workers reign over the economy? I really like the way he put that too. Why don't workers reign over the economy? Why aren't there more worker-owned businesses? Why don't you have better worker compensation, or worker pensions, or worker voice on the board of directors? And that's the crux of it to me. Workers are getting killed. We got killed. We get killed. But we're in the more metaphorical sense, also really, really struggling while corporations and the big wigs on top run up the profits. And of course, the world burns. So we've got to shift power back to workers. And these and many other topics are what I'm looking forward to hearing our panelists discuss tonight. So I'm very pleased to introduce our panel moderator, Briahna Joy Gray. She's an attorney, a writer, and a broadcaster. Briahna was, of course, the National Press Secretary for the Bernie Sanders 2020 presidential campaign, which I won't do the show of hands. I'm sure a lot of us were very interested in trying to help get over the line. She's written for Current Affairs, The Intercept, and she's on the Hill's web series Rising, while of course hosting her own podcast, and I'm sure there's many other fans of it here, Bad Faith. So she's a vocal critic of the Democratic Party establishment and its ties to corporate interests and big money donors. Really delighted that she's here. Please welcome up to this area here, the little stage, Briahna Joy Gray.
into my camera in my kitchen in my apartment. So it's a thrill for me to be with you today as well, and it is an incredible thrill to announce the panel that we have today. I'm sure, I think of myself in the role that I play as a podcaster and hosting a news show as someone very, very much is in your position. Someone who joined and started writing political articles because I was frustrated with the state of American politics, was able to move into doing that full time, and it felt like a privilege to be able to do what I would do on the side because I just was passionate about it and furious about how things were going. I joined the Bernie Sanders campaign because I was, I guess, talking so loudly and so much about the things that he was already talking about that he felt like it might as well put me on the payroll. And I continue to do this because it is a passion of mine and because I have a lot of curiosity about how things got so bad, and I'm honored to be able to talk directly to so many people who've managed to change so much in such a short period of time about how we can move the ball a little farther down the field. So today I'd like to introduce Cora Bergantiños-Crespo. I'm sorry if I'm butchering the heck out of your name. I meant to talk to you beforehand. She's the president of the Columbia Postdoctoral Workers Union, the first postdoctoral union in New York City, and the first at a private university anywhere in the United States. So welcome. We're also joined by Rosenblum, who's a writer, producer, and organizer in nonfiction TV and film. He has been helping the Writers Guild of America East organize the nonfiction industry since 2014 and helped win a union election vote at Left Field Pictures. Welcome, Ben. Chris Hedges, I'm sure it needs not much of an introduction, but is a Pulitzer-prize winning journalist and author, National Books Critics Circle Award for Nonfiction finalist, host on Contact for RT America, and Truth Dig as well. Teaches writing classes. I know that you were very passionate about that as well, in prisons in New Jersey through a program offered by Princeton and then later through Rutgers. Please welcome Chris Hedges. Here today, Kshama Sawant, Seattle City Council member since 2014, first socialist to win citywide election in Seattle since the early part of the 20th century. I was reading a little bit more about you. I didn't realize that you had a PhD in economics from NC State. And successfully fought and won, of course, the fight for 15 in Seattle, really put it on the national. Why is Worker Strike Back different from other organizing and movement efforts? We have had many a debate on my podcast and elsewhere about why there are flaws in pursuing an electoral strategy. You yourself have decided to step away from the Seattle City Council because you feel like there's a limit, I suppose, as you put it, to what can be accomplished through that particular means, and have pivoted toward Worker Strike Back as a different kind of effort. What do you hope to accomplish with Worker Strike Back, and how does it differ from some of the other kinds of movement and organizing efforts that have been taken place, including things like DSA and the strategy of running candidates as democratic socialists in the Democratic Party?
Well, that is pretty much everything that we're really talking about. I'll try not to spend too much time because we want to have a discussion, but really Briahna's question encapsulates all the fundamental questions of why we are doing Worker Strike Back and what is the strategy forward. It's not just about Worker Strike Back, it's about the strategy for the left in the United States and really globally. And Worker Strike Back is an illustration of what we need. And so just sort of stepping back and just going by what one of the things that Dan mentioned earlier is the opinion polls in the United States. If you look at the how American working people feel, for example, about the economy. 70% of Americans today say that they don't think the economy today or what they think is likely in the future is going to be good for them. They know that the economy is not working for them. If you look at the opinions on climate change, they have also shifted in the last 2 decades. And of course, we don't need to convince ordinary people. Like if you are witnessing wildfires around you, if you're in Canada, or if you're looking at the orange air and sky in New York City, you don't need to be convinced that something dramatically needs to be changed as far as climate change is concerned. And overall, if you look at, again, polls on Medicare for all, or the need for a living wage, Dan mentioned the support for unions, and this room itself, this auditorium itself is testament to that. The support for unionizing has never been this strong, I think, in many of our lifetimes. And we're just 3 years out from the largest street protest movement in U.S. history, which is the Black Lives Matter, during the George Floyd rebellion. And so, what does all of this tell us? This tells us that the American working people, especially young people, don't need convincing that things are wrong. That's not exactly how I would say if I was having a private conversation with you. I would have more salty words to describe it. But you know what I mean.
I love salty.
Me too. They don't need to be convinced that things aren't working. Amazon warehouse workers don't need to be convinced that their life sucks with the way the bosses treat them and that they need a union. In fact, at this moment, a lot of tech workers who have seen tens of thousands of layoffs are beginning to understand that the tech industry that it was promised to be a panacea 20 years ago is not some sort of guarantee. You could be making a 6-figure salary and then you could be laid off. And there's no protection for you because the billionaire bosses who became $6 trillion richer throughout the pandemic are not going to be there. They're going to extract the price of the recession and the economy's problems and capitalism's malaise from you, not from themselves. And so, what's missing here? It's not that we need to tell people, hey, things are screwed up, we need to do something. What's missing is political leadership to make some sort of change. And that's where Workers' Strike Back comes in, and that's where all the work that we have done in the nearly 10 years that we've had the office in Seattle with Socialist Alternative comes in. And that's the kind of work that the panel members here are here to talk about as well. And what's missing is, for example, in the labor movement, a real militant fighting kind of strategy. And in fact, what's been available for the most part is what we would call business unionism, and we should talk more about this. I won't go too much into it. But basically the strategy of not really fighting and using the latent power that working people have to stop production, to go on strike, all of that. And all of that ties to the questions, Briahna, you raised about what's failed with the DSA leadership. What is the problem with their running as a Democratic Party, through the Democratic Party? And I think we should also talk about the major announcement that has happened where Cornel West has said that he's running for president, but not as a Democrat, but as independent of the Democratic Party. So all of this really comes into what Workers' Strike Back is about. The reason we've launched Workers' Strike Back as a nationwide movement is because there is a deep hunger for this kind of strategy, this kind of ideas that we know work, but they are not on offer from vast swaths of labor leadership, social movement leadership, and certainly in the electoral arena. And what we're talking about, as I said, is a fighting strategy. So it's not a coincidence that Workers' Strike Back is calling for a $25 an hour minimum wage, so at least $25 an hour, union jobs for everyone, Medicare for all. But it's also no coincidence that we're also calling for a new party for the working class because it's not working with the Democrats and Republicans.
Kshama was making some of the critiques of union leadership, and I wonder if you had some insights or some anecdotes about what you've experienced as you've been organizing with the Writers Guild.
Yes, yeah, so I had been organizing as just a rank and file writer for many years, and basically we were struggling, and it was very difficult for us to get contracts, and it wasn't clear kind of what the general vision was or the strategy was of our organizing. And I would try to ask some of the union leadership at the WGA, and it wasn't always very clear. So eventually I decided to run for council, and I luckily ran this election where it was kind of serendipitous, and I was able to win. This was to kind of find out what was going on behind the scenes, because it's not always very clear. A lot of times in these unions, at least in my union, the Writers Guild, it's like, it's very progressive union. It's very super active. Obviously, as everyone knows, we're on strike. It's doing great things, and we're fighting for the right things. But sometimes there's not a lot of membership awareness of what's going on. It's kind of like, go here and do this, go here and do that. So that's one of the issues that I wanted to get into this leadership position, to see actually what was going on, how it functions. And yeah, like Kshama said, there are unfortunately elements of business unionism in a lot of these unions, like with the Writers Guild, which is obviously seriously enmeshed in Hollywood, and it's this huge, the biggest corporations in the world that these unions are negotiating with. So it's a matter of practice, where sometimes they feel like they have to act like a business, or they have to treat the union as if they want to secure the bottom line or get enough dues, or make kind of maybe even interesting agreements or deals with the network, with the studios, to come to some sort of compromise, and it's unfortunate. So yeah, getting into leadership, I've unfortunately seen some of that, and I think it needs to be addressed. It needs to, people need to be aware of these things, and I think we need to get as much. What I've realized is that we need, basically when I got into leadership, I was like, I can make a choice here. Because what happens when, and I heard Kshama has talked about this before, in her political experience, but there's this aspect of, you have to kind of go along to get along. You have to play the game once you get in it. I was immediately inundated with these ways of handling things. I had to make a choice: was I going to stay principled, or was I going to kind of do this way of politicking? And I decided there's a lot to get into about my particular circumstances, but I made a choice to stay principled and to actually fight for things that we needed, because nonfiction is. I'm part of a sector of the Writers Guild that's not fully unionized. We're not, technically, nonfiction is not a part of the NBA contract right now that people are striking over, unfortunately. But we've been fighting to get onto this contract. So yeah, it's been such a struggle to figure out what to do here. So that's why I ran for council, to get in to this position, to figure out what to do. But it's interesting. I made the choice to stay principled and kind of fight for these things that we absolutely need. And I was faced with tremendous pushback from some of these other leaders. They're like, why aren't you going along with this? People were very thrown out. So there's a lot of pressure in these positions, and I think it's important that we put our foot down and we maintain our principles. And another thing that's important is that we get the rank and file involved as much as possible, because what I've seen is that a lot of these in these leadership positions, people feel very kind of egotistical or whatever. So you get in these positions and they're like, we run the show kind of, and we're going to figure it out, and they're very empowered in that regard, and it becomes very, there's not as much transparency as there should be. So I think that's something that we should be very aware of, and we should be fighting for as much democracy, as much transparency as possible in negotiations, and just in the daily functioning and legislative actions of these unions. So just something everyone should be aware of.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. My observation as a very lay person, as I started interviewing people and asking folks, well, Bernie's over, what's next? What's the next avenue for change? And I would get people saying, organize to me, organizing. And I would say, okay, what does that look like? What can we do? What's, like, constructively, what are the obstacles? And then they would say things about all the reasons why there were impediments to organizing. And, you know, it felt a little bit like a circular conversation. And so I'm going to ask you, Cora, like, if you've experienced similar issues with an unwillingness to be adversarial or as direct as the leadership being as adversarial as they need to, and how and in what ways you would like Workers Strike Back or an organization like this to support you. What would empower rank and file to be able to run the organization, run the unions in a way that was more effective if there were support from another organization like Workers Strike Back? How would that help?
So thanks so much. I mean, I think, like, you know, we are a relatively young union. We were formed just 3 years ago, and it's been, you know, a whole experience to build our local in the university, on Columbia University. And we are right now negotiating our second contract, and something that is very clear, that actually we had a bargaining session yesterday, like, you know, there is a point in which really as a union, you, like, management is telling you no way, that's not gonna happen. And, you know, like, in some ways you have to look what is your power, what is your strategy, and what can you do next. And of course you can have a lot of, you know, I mean, I think that we are pretty democratic, like, you know, a lot of people put a lot of work to make sure that we send information in a slide, in emails, we go one-to-one to talk, and so on and so forth. But the reality is, like, on itself, if we don't have alternatives of how to fight back, even if the majority of the workers say this is absolutely outrageous, we cannot take this, you don't know what to do, right? And that's the reality of you know, what happened yesterday at the session, or some of my members here will remember. And what I think that is extremely important, and that what I think that Workers Strike Back is really, really important, it's that, you know, I think that Kshama mentioned, like, what we need as workers is not only to be involved, but we also need the power and the strategy to win against managements that are extremely powerful and extremely, have a lot of money, a lot of good lawyers, a lot of things that we don't have, you know, they can reach out, our bosses, they can, you know, one of the things that Columbia University is doing now is telling everyone, if you had a salary, it's not gonna happen until you agree to a contract. So our workers are right now like, oh shit, either we take what Columbia is giving us or we don't have any salary. They have a lot of power. And I think like really, when we can start, you know, like really breaking that framework, it's when we feel that we are not alone, right? I mean, for us, obviously, as workers inside our union, but I think that also connected with other unions, with other battles, and with society as a whole. And I think like that's why Workers Strike Back is extremely powerful. Like Workers Strike Back here in New York have been tabling with us. I'm obviously a member of Workers Strike Back, you see, and Socialist Alternative, and yeah, I think like that's really what can help us and everyone else.
Well, Chris Hedges, we've talked at times about the sense of pessimism that has overtaken much of the left, some of the infighting that has resulted as a consequence of perhaps not being united under one overarching umbrella, an ideological umbrella, the way that Bernie kind of presented to us. And you have been a model to so many people with your specific organizing efforts, the work that you do in prison, these strident and principled takes that you've had throughout even more despairing periods. But there are times I think that I know that I look around and I think, wow, they said a couple of things on the internet about being mad at a pride display in a Target, and they managed to mobilize all of these wackadoos to go and destroy all of this displays across the country. And I see how quickly a relatively narrow niche area has grown in stigma because of the purposeful lobbying by some really, frankly, good comms work by people like Christopher Rufo who have managed to grow a very small issue that frankly has very little material impact on most Americans into a national movement that is frankly hurting the bottom line of some significant companies. Not that I'm crying any tears for the losses these corporations are accruing, but the fact of something being able to be grown in that way, from something very small to something very big, through a messaging strategy, as a comms person, strikes me as very interesting. And I wonder if you've reflected at all about the comparative value of a movement like this, and a moment like this with Workers Strike Back, and the need that many people obviously have to be drawn to an organization like this, at the same time that the right has managed to galvanize so many people who similarly feel that need, but to focus on these other sorts of cultural issues. Have you given much thought on how to harness that kind of energy, perhaps use some kind of comms type strategies to rewrite the ship and direct people back into a leftward direction as they flail around in this void that very much exists right now?
Yeah, I just want to correct my bio. I don't write for Truth Dig because we all went on strike to form a union. We were all fired. And I do teach in the prison in the Rutgers College degree program, which makes me an adjunct at Rutgers, and I was just, of course, on the strike line at Rutgers. And I have to admit to being an unabashed fan of Kshama Sawant. So it was alternative since she began. I went out there when they began, because we don't live in a democracy. We live in what the political philosopher Sheldon Wolin correctly calls a system of inverted totalitarianism. You can get his book, Democracy Incorporated, so I won't spell that out for you now. But we've undergone a kind of slow-motion corporate coup d'etat. And the reason is because, starting as Ralph said, you may know I worked with Ralph, I was a speechwriter, and I love and admire Ralph. I think he's one of the great Americans of our time. With the Taft-Hartley Act up through the present, and with the whole rise of the gig economy, they have destroyed the power of the working class, which is the only power they have, which is to carry out strikes. And we just saw Biden sell out the freight railroad workers, hauling that he got away with this. And remember that Biden and the Democrats, when they ran, talked about strengthening collective bargaining. And then, of course, when the freight railroad workers threaten a strike, they strip the ability of collective bargaining from one of the very few entities in the United States that has it. The only hope for the restoration of our democracy is you, everyone in this room. It isn't going to come through a political party. I love Cornell. Cornell just called me. I'm going to call him. But Cornell's or any progressive, even Bernie, has no power without the power of unions. And that is the most important political tool we have, is organizing the working class to begin to put pressure on an oligarchic system that has orchestrated social inequality unlike anything we have seen in the United States. I mean, you have to look at Pharaonic Egypt. We're talking about, when John D. Rockefeller died, I think he was worth, $2-3 billion. We have oligarchs, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, others. These people have 180, it's the last one, probably more now, $80 billion. And they bought out both parties completely. So this movement to begin to organize, and Kshama speaks about this and knows more about it than I do, but it is not just confronting a system that's gained against us through the two-party duopoly, but it's also confronting a union leadership that has become junior partners in the capitalist system. So all of the successful strikes, the West Virginia teachers strike, that was a wildcat strike. And that's what the railroad workers should have done. Now, of course, the fear is that they would have ended up as the air traffic controllers. They would have lost their, and I think that's a legitimate fear. But until we step outside the system and begin to pit organized power against power, not only are things going to get worse, but the political system itself, which is completely captured by corporate money, is going to, the Republicans do it perhaps at a faster rate than the Democrats, but they're both driving workers into a system of virtual serfdom. That's what the gig economy is. With all of the, and we can't forget the attendant problems of health, stress. You know, it's not just that wages, and Barbara Ehrenreich, if you haven't read her great book, Nickel and Dime, she talks, and she tries to work as in house cleaning and those. Finally gets into Walmart and just breaks down. She can't physically even do it. But she talks about being in the working poor in this country as just one long emergency. Yep. And so that's why I think that what Kshama is doing is not just important in terms of an issue of economic justice, but it's and I know she's aware of this, its end goal is really the recapture of our democracy, wresting hands from the corporate state, or let's call it what it is, overthrowing the corporate state. I can spell that out for the Homeland Security. But that's what we're talking about. We're talking about ultimately a political revolution where, as Aristotle said, when the aristocratic elite takes over, your only two options are revolution and tyranny. And we're moving I'm a journalist, so I'm very acutely aware. I was just on the phone the other day to my friend Matt Taibbi, who exposed in the Twitter files the huge blacklists that are orchestrated by Homeland Security, the State Department, the CIA, the FBI. It's an FBI-led task force, and they reach out weekly to all of the social media. And who do they blacklist? Occupy activists, anybody who has a critique of the system from the left or the right. And what's happened, the kind of anemic quality of journalism, MSNBC, they're all the same. They all are trying to get us to dance to the same tune. So my hope is really, without being overly dramatic, is you. That's where the hope lies in this country. If we are going to restore a democratic system, it's going to come through militant, organized labor that uses the only weapon we have. Go back and look at the 1930s, and let's not write out the Communist Party. We always erase the Communist Party, which was key to challenging the capitalist system with a breakdown of capitalism in the 30s. It's going to come from the strike, from the ability to cripple these oligarchic elites and force them. Politics is not a game of compromise. Politics is a game of fear. And our job is to make them very, very afraid.
I was warned against making this a panel that just devolved into a conversation about Cornel West. And,
Cornel's great. I love Cornel.
But it is, I think, the elephant in the room, which is that, back to my original question, there is something kind of frustrating but heartening and scary also about how quickly some of these campaigns seem to have gotten a lot of energy and a lot of attention. And I'm very curious about what it is that attracts so many people, so many ideologically diverse people to someone like RFK Jr. and the alliances that are forming between the David Sachs, Elon Musk folks and RFK Jr., who's spent most of the time, the last 30 years as an environmental activist, and the ways that they're able to occupy the same spaces and talk past each other and touch on only what they mutually agree upon. I'm interested in that way that the same cohort seems to have a lot of openness and positivity around Cornel West and what that means. I'm interested in the realignment that seems to be happening and the energy that is pouring out of that realignment in that political space right now. And I think for a lot of folks, they hear, well, the future is through organizing and through the power of the strike, and that is exciting, but also a little scary because that seems like a longer time horizon than some of the things that are happening in the electoral space, and that's why electoralism draws so much focus and attention. And so the question remains, even what you just articulated being true, what to do in the shorter term with the political machinations that are happening around us. How does one prevent a kind of sheep herding to the right? That very much seems to be happening with even some very good faith people, I think. What does it mean when there's so much energy going in that direction? And do we just ignore it and focus exclusively on these kind of labor goals? Or do we have to walk and chew gum at the same time? And if so, what does that look like? And what do you recommend insofar as how we should participate in these elections that are happening with or without us?
Well, the sheep herding to the right has been the primary focus or primary fault of the Democratic Party.
Yep.
Because they sold out working men and women.
Yep.
And still talk out of the other side of their mouth. Biden calls himself the most pro-labor president. And that's the problem. And the rage, half of my family comes out of the working class in Maine. I mean, my uncle lived in a trailer, my other uncle ran a lumber mill, my grandfather worked at a post office, and their towns, like most rural areas in the country, are destroyed. I mean, literally, the town my grandparents are from, the bank is boarded up. It doesn't even have a bank anymore. And this was all Clinton. And so, of course, the Democrats, both parties only offer the alternative of fear of the other. That's really all they offer.
Yep.
I mean, you have the tangential cultural issues, which are not tangential if you're a woman or not tangential if you're LGBTQ. I don't want in any way minimize the injustice that the Republican Party, and in particular the Trumpists, have towards these groups. But on all the fundamental issues, there's no difference. Trade deals, the obscene military budget, austerity, wholesale surveillance. We are the most monitored, spied upon, watched, photographed population in human history. And when your government watches you 24 hours a day, you can't use the word liberty. That's the relationship between a master and a slave. And I think that the propaganda machine is so effective and amplified by corporate media, including MSNBC and everyone else, that it's obscured the reality around us. And you ask about how do we deal, the key is labor. And it doesn't matter who's in, even Bernie had won, he would have been paralyzed as a political figure. The key is labor. And you go back and look at Roosevelt. A friend of mine is writing a critique of Obama's, working. Have you watched it?
I haven't. I've seen.
Well, he showed me some clips, and it's really, truly a piece of shit. And he pretends to be Studs Terkel, of all people. I mean, talk about a political understanding of the nature between bosses and workers. So we have to rebuild labor. That's key. Without that, it doesn't really matter who's in the White House. Now, there are, I think, big differences. I don't want to get into this debate between Kennedy and Cornell. But the biggest difference is that Cornell, who's a very close friend of mine, has had, he's just turned 70, he has had a genuine commitment to the marginalized of this country since he became a public figure in his early 20s. And I would say that also is true with Bernie, his commitment to the labor. I don't agree with his positions towards the Democratic Party, as you don't either, but I don't think Bernie's a fake. And I think what worries me about any political figure, including Kennedy, is that when they come to these issues, late, you have to wonder how deep that commitment is. And that commitment is deep with Cornell. And anyway, I could never vote for Kennedy because he just pissed on my good friend Roger Waters. Not Bernie, I mean Kennedy.
Well, Kshama, let me ask you this, because to Supreme Court decisions, labor decisions. We are in a world where one of the most powerful unions with the most agency did have their strike opportunity stripped from them by the President of the United States of America, who hails himself as the most pro-union president of all time. And in the face of those obstacles, what do you say to people who are demoralized by the uphill battle? That is, if what Chris Hedges says is true, the way out of this is labor. And at every turn, our opportunities to organize and weaponize labor for the interests of the working people are being narrowed. Then, what's the end game there, and how do you overcome those kinds of very significant obstacles? And the way the system is getting increasingly rigged against the very effort that you're starting here.
You're right that people, there is a real danger that a lot of working people, young people, could get demoralized if there's no real fight back. But I think at the same time, what we're also seeing is a real desire to actually fight back. I mean, we're talking about the glacier Northwest versus Tuesday ruling, which I want to come back to in a second, because it also talks about, it also is a lesson in what is the problem right now with the labor movement. But even before that, just to get a sense of where American consciousness is, when the Dobbs ruling was leaked, it was going to be a historic attack and repeal of Roe v. Wade, at a time when the majority of the American population supported Roe v. Wade. Let's keep in mind, it's not like the Supreme Court in any way represented the mass opinion in America on that question. But at that time, what did we see? We didn't see actually ordinary people, especially young women, ordinary women, their position was not, I'm demoralized, I need to just stay home and feel bad. Their position was, where are the protests happening? Where can I go and fight against this absolutely horrendous position that the Supreme Court is about to take? And again, I think that's why the theme here is not the overarching reality right now is not that there is demoralization. Yes, there is, of course, there's a lull in social movements right now, there's no question about that. But that, that's on the surface. What is masking is what exists underneath is real anger that's waiting to come out. And it already has come out in so many different ways. But if you look at what happened during the protests against the Dobbs ruling, none of the big organizations that are tied, women's organizations tied to the Democratic Party, organized anything. You could hardly even hear anything that they were saying. There were no protests organized by Planned Parenthood, no protests from NARAL pro-choice. You know who organized protests? It was Socialist Alternative. And we're a small organization, but those protests brought out tens of thousands of young people out on the streets. And it was a glimpse of what would have been possible. Not only had there been a fight back when there was a big organization that called for a fight back after the ruling was leaked, but also was a grim reminder of how, once again, it was not that the American working people didn't want Roe v. Wade, but it was a reminder, it was a painful reminder of the fact that the Democrats had failed to codify Roe v. Wade, which is why we were there in the first place. And so, I honestly don't see a shortage, and I don't mean to sound blasé or simplistic. Obviously, there is a real current of right wing, and at this moment, Trump being the leading candidate of the Republican Party says something about where things have gone. But my point is that things are not static. The consciousness of American working people is not static. Many of the people who ended up either getting depoliticized or voting for Trump in 2016 were people who supported Bernie Sanders. So it's not static, it's a question of what's on offer, and I think that's where the question of, sort of everything that you were talking about earlier comes into being. I mean, what has failed is not only business unionism, as Ben and Cora were talking about, but also what has happened with the DSA. The DSA DSA's membership exploded following 2016, and now they are an organization in decline. Would we conclude from that interest in socialism is reduced? Absolutely not. What we would conclude from that is that DSA leadership has failed. And tied to that also is the role that the squad has played. What have AOC and Jamal Bowman and others succeeded in doing? So it's a whole series of things. It's not one thing. It's failing to fight on $15 an hour Medicare for all, and also most recently on the debt ceiling vote, the squad and many of the progressives voted no. But if you pay close attention to what they were saying, and there's a really good interview, it's not good, but it's a good indication, from Congressmember Khanna, where he says that, he said that I voted no because my conscience wouldn't let me, in no good conscience could I vote for a deal that really in many ways decimates a lot of the support structure for the poorest people, the nutritional assistance program and all of that. But while he was saying that, he said also that, making clear that his vote, the vote of the progressives and squad, was utterly symbolic. He said that, and at the same time, we knew the deal was going to pass, and Biden knew that if he needed us, we were going to be there. And he said that with a straight face. It doesn't even enter their minds that this is a really rotten position. What you're showing is your unbridled loyalty to Biden and the Democratic establishment. And so, again, all of this shows that this is a complete dead end. And so, going back to your earlier question about, we're hearing that we need to organize, but there's also excitement around electoral campaigns. I think the reality is that it's not like it's a chronologically separate process. The whole point, and this is what Socialist Alternative was saying when Bernie ran in 2016, is that it's not just about a campaign. As Chris was saying, it's not like we're waiting for one superhero. The point is, can we have a genuine fighting campaign on the left with a real program, a working class program that has the ability to unite tens of millions of American working people? And can we use that campaign as a vehicle to build something bigger, especially a political organization that can have a real life beyond just one presidential campaign, and an organization not just of any kind, not just a third party, but a political organization, a party that is based in social movement, that is based in the labor movement, and that is not separate from the fight back that needs to happen on all these fronts. And really, that is, going back to something that you were saying earlier, yes, we're not running for re-election in Seattle, but we're not in any way abandoning those ideas, because that is precisely what we want to take nationwide. Because the reason we've been successful in Seattle is precisely because we used our office as that kind of vehicle to do something bigger. And had we not succeeded in mobilizing tens of thousands of people, whether it was for $15 an hour or winning the Amazon tax, which is a $214 million tax on corporations like Amazon to fund affordable housing, had we not mobilized tens of thousands of people to win these kinds of victories, we would not have won 4 elections. We have won 4 elections in Seattle, and we are going to leave the council office undefeated, despite having corporate landlords, Amazon, Jeff Bezos himself, the entire Democratic Party in Seattle arrayed against us, is because we succeeded in bringing the rank and file of the city to fight for something concrete. That's what we're talking about. So whether it's a question of the union movement and whether it's unionization drive or a contract battle, or you're talking about the electoral arena, that's the kind of where you have an elected office and you have the chance to win something. It doesn't matter which you're talking about, or BLM kind of social movement. It doesn't matter which of these arenas you're talking about. The strategy is, can we organize around concrete demands that will bring in, as Ben was saying, the rank and file of that, that context, whether it's the union or Black Lives Matter activists to win something. And so what didn't succeed about Black Lives Matter was not that the rank and file didn't mobilize. I mean, it was only the largest protest movement in US history, and yet it doesn't have much to show for it in terms of victories, because the BLM leaders didn't actually show that kind of principled approach, as Ben was saying, in order to actually represent the interests of working people and black community members, and instead used their influential positions to get cozy with the Democratic parties, to get millions of dollars of funding for their pet NGOs, and sold out the movement for the most part. And it was during the BLM movement that we won the Amazon tax. And I just wanted to, share a quote. When we were running for re-election in 2019, one of the landlord lobbyists said that every dollar they spend, and they spend a lot of money, lobbying the Democrats on the city council. It's 8 Democrats on the city council. We are 1 socialist. He said that while the socialists are in the council, every dollar we spend on the Democrats is wasted. Because we, meaning the landlord lobby, get all the right answers from the Democrats behind the scenes. But when they are confronted with what he calls Sawant's army, and it's not about me, obviously, it's what he means. Yeah. But our enemies give us they give us the best compliments. They understand what really it's about. As Chris was saying, it's what are they afraid of? They're not afraid of any one individual. What they are afraid of is that army of working people that shows up in city council chambers and exposes the rottenness of the politicians who speak from both sides of their mouth. And so all these promises that they make to landlords, they come in chambers and confronted with angry renters, and they are forced to vote yes on renters' rights, which is what has happened. We've won a whole host of renters' rights victories on that basis. So ultimately, that's the approach we need, whether we're talking about union rights or electoral campaigns.
To weigh in on any of the things that have been said so far, but I'm also really curious about your respective view on business unionism, because that does feel like, in an immediate way, a significant obstacle, especially to both of you in your efforts, you being on strike right now, Ben. And when you were talking about it before, it was with some hesitation and a little bit of abstraction that perhaps speaks to the fear and the real concerns that if you say the wrong thing or cross the wrong lines, then the efforts could be undermined. So I don't want to push you too far into an uncomfortable territory, but I would be curious to know with more specificity what you're up against and what you think could help.
Yeah, some of these union leaders they've been in office and in these positions for a long time, and they're not used to anyone kind of asking the most basic questions about certain things that are happening, and they get really intimidated, or they get really insecure, I think, and then they start trying to act very intimidating, and they start actually. I've experienced, I didn't know, because it's so odd, the Writers Guild is a very progressive, like I said before, progressive union, they're overtly kind of this progressive force, but when you start to, actually fight for some sort of change, or even in the mildest sense, they get, in these leadership positions, they get they start getting very insecure about what you're doing.
So what does it mean when you say that they're a progressive union? What are you talking about?
So they're, they it's, I don't want to push too hard because it's we're in the middle of this, pretty intense strike, but they are left-leaning, I guess you could say. They fight for, I guess they're overtly they go on strike. Out of all the entertainment unions, they I think takedowns are most. So they actually push for change. They've won substantial gains based on like this these strikes that they've pushed for. But yeah, what was so odd, because they seem like they're very progressive, and you'd think that they would be kind of open to a lot of change and progress. They when they're faced with it in these like insular kind of leadership bodies, they push back. I've faced like a lot of kind of crazy pushback. I've been removed. Like I'm coming from a very unique position here, because I'm in this sector of TV and film that's it's called nonfiction, and it's like a little bit outside of the main screenwriter little bubble that they have. So we're kind of fighting to get in this contract that they have. So I think there's kind of this old guard that's trying to secure the stuff that they've fought for so long, that they don't want anyone kind of challenging that. But yeah, I've been basically advocating for nonfiction to work together so that we can all actually achieve more. And there's been pushback where I've been kind of suppressed from speaking in certain forums, and they don't want to hear some of these issues. I think this is a big problem. It's analogous kind of to the Democratic Party, where they don't talk about any of these inherent issues. They don't want to even discuss them, like some of the lack of transparency, some of the lack of democracy. Like right now with the negotiations going on with the Writers Guild, it's all happening behind closed doors. Like, so they have you know, they've revealed the demands that they're asking for, but all these talks are not completely open. So yeah, it's an interesting kind of thing to, when you peel back the layers a little bit and you find out what's going on. There's roadblocks there. So even though it seems like they're making they're pushing as much as they can, they're kind of also their own roadblock in a way. I mean, they don't want people to challenge it. They don't want people to ask questions about it necessarily, which is odd, and that's something that I've faced. So.
What do you think's at the root of that?
I think they don't want to be held accountable. Some of these people that are in these positions, they don't, like specifically, that's what I've seen. Like some of these people in these leadership positions, they feel like maybe they've been overseeing this for so long, and they don't want to be seen as kind of responsible for issues. So if there's that's why there's this kind of, you know, if you see these leaders that have been in these positions for so long, you should question that because you know, they don't want any change. They seemingly may not want any change. But yeah, I think there's also this kind of selfish tendency that I've seen that happens where people don't think of the bigger picture in these positions. They kind of get very close-minded and they just try to fight for themselves, and that seems to be a little bit of what happens, and it creates this kind of divisiveness, even within unions, which is unfortunate. But I think we all have to be cognizant of the fact that we should all be kind of working together to actually achieve more. But yeah, I've seen this very close-mindedness in these leadership bodies that have been unfortunate, and it's something I didn't expect going into it. So it's been tough. I mean, I think it's something that we all have to be aware of as we organize within these unions. So I think it's important we, like Kshama and others were saying before, that what I realized getting into this position is that, because basically, I think there's this idea that unions are this panacea. It's like they're going to solve everything. We don't have to question how they operate or anything like that. But these are actually the institutions that are supposed to be run and operated by us. And I think just over the years, since they've been decimated, I think they've just fallen into the hands of this small group of people who kind of just asserted control and maybe things have, like we've talked about, it's kind of formed this like business unionist style, and maybe they're a little insecure about having that revealed or whatever it is. I'm not inside their heads, but it's very interesting to see.
Yeah, it is interesting. I saw a lot of people nodding. I know when we asked at the beginning how many of you were in unions, there were a lot of hands raised, and it seems like a lot of you in those unions have experienced these similar kinds of obstacles. And I know this has been, this is a drum I beat on my show a lot, which is what to do. If unions and organizing are being framed as a panacea oftentimes, but there is this leadership problem, then are we being really honest about fighting with those fronts, and do we have a strategy to confront? Okay, we unionized, but now the boss is still not helpful to me. It's still an obstacle in and of itself. And Kshama, I wonder, how much, thought you've given to the strategy of what to do to make the few unionized workplaces that we have, the relatively small percentage of unions that we have now, more effective? Is it a two-pronged strategy we're talking about here?
Two prongs, as in?
Yeah, both creating more unions and making sure the unions that exist aren't self-defeating because the leadership is co-opted.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. We absolutely need to grow the union movement. And in fact, it brings up an interesting point. Like, sometimes it will happen where workers are in a union and genuinely want to use the union as a fighting organ, want to improve their wages, want to win a strong contract, but then when they have, unfortunately, as it is, a business unionist type leadership, and also, there are differences, and I think some of what Ben was expressing was, it's not all just the exact same flavor in all the union leadership. There's some variations, but for the most part, I think the phrase that Chris used really fits, like, this, in some shape or form, what you have for the most part is union leadership that sees its role as being junior partners to the bosses, and so they have that instinctively has them present a conciliatory approach towards the bosses rather than saying, well, we have all these members, they need to be mobilized into carrying out, at the very least, protest actions, if not striking, and ultimately, the strike is the real and only weapon that workers have, and a prepared strike action, that requires the leadership to really understand that it's not just about calling for a strike, but preparing a powerful strike in the first place. But sometimes you can see workers who want to do something, they come up against this major obstacle of a leadership that is not willing to fight for them and alongside them, and then it could lead to feelings of not wanting to be in a union. We hear workers say, well, I don't want to be in a union if this is what happens. And that comes from a genuine place of frustration. And so, yes, we absolutely need to have the strategy that you're talking about, Briahna, which is really be emphatic about the role of the union, and union, and also explaining fundamentally what is a union. A union is a way for workers to get organized and work, fight as one unit in terms of, just building solidarity. It's as simple as that. And so, without that, what it means is we're all one individuals, and as individuals, individual workers, we have zero power against the bosses. We are absolutely crushed under their might. And I think on that basis, there is huge potential to win over working people, especially young people. And we're going to hear from workers who are here. We're really fortunate to have workers here from the KCBG organizing drive, which is easily the most inspiring thing happening right now. But what we see here is the contrast between what's happening at KCBG, and you're going to hear from the workers directly, so I won't talk about that. But the contrast between that and what we're seeing in the Starbucks union drive. So there was no less of a sentiment in favor of a union in the among the Starbucks workers. There was huge excitement. I was personally there. Seattle is headquarters of the Starbucks Corporation. And so we saw a lot, after the Buffalo Union was won, union election was won, there was huge momentum in Seattle as well. And we talked to so many workers who were super excited about all of this. But what was missing, and this is not the, we don't blame rank and file workers for this, but the strategy that the Starbucks Workers United leadership came with, unfortunately, that does not work. And it's now, and we were having that debate with them at that time, and time has proven that it doesn't work. And what is that strategy? The strategy is refusing to go on strike, refusing to use a fighting approach overall. Literally, when they would write letters, public letters to the bosses, they would say in solidarity. You don't sign a letter to the boss saying in solidarity. So that itself is an indication of a fundamental misconception of the built-in adversarial character of the relationship between bosses and workers. You can't have a union leadership looking to find unity between the greed of the bosses and the needs of the workers and hope that that strategy is going to succeed. Going in, the ABCs of organizing, if you want to win, is to understand that there's an adversarial relationship between bosses and workers. And so with that, with those basic elements of what it means to organize workers, with those basic elements missing, unfortunately what we have seen now at this point, and this is by no means some fatalistic position, I'm just stating facts, is the strength of the union drive has really gone down, and no contract has been won. And the corporation at this moment has the upper hand. And they've also just because of their stores, they're organized into stores, they were able to also use various union busting tactics, like literally shutting down stores. And so our task is not just to point out what the problems are, but our task is to imbibe the lessons from what hasn't worked and also understand what needs to be done in the union movement as a whole. And so I think it's the lessons so far that we have from ACBG are going to be very important for us to hear. And then I'll just end on this point. All of this is of extreme consequence for us. Also, not only because of the organizing in Amazon, but also because of what is coming on the horizon in this summer, is the contract battle at UPS. It's difficult to overstate the significance of what impact this will have. This can really determine the course of the most upcoming labor history of what happens with the UPS contract. And I think it's very important for us to grow workers' strike back, because we want to talk to the rank and file UPS workers, many of whom want to go on strike, and there's a new reform leadership that has been elected. But rather than just sort of put our faith in the leadership from the sidelines, we want to engage with the workers and understand how we can win. And part of it is also just organizing around concrete demands. And that was also another thing missing in the Starbucks union. And I think Ben made a very important point, is that there's a reason why many of the business unionist leaders don't take up concrete demands, is because it puts them on the hook to win something. And they always say, well, we don't want to do this because we don't want to promise workers. That's the wrong approach. I mean, first of all, yes, you do have to be accountable. So you do have your neck on the line, and you better have your neck on the line, because you say you represent workers, so you should be accountable. But it is not but it's also not a one-sided process, in the sense that workers are saying, well, you go and win this for us in the bargaining room and we're going to sit back. No, workers want to fight. And one of the main points that Workers' Strike Back has been making is that the power of workers does not exist in the bargaining room. It exists outside, when you mobilize workers into strike actions and you bring out the community in support. I mean, Chris mentioned the West Virginia teacher strike. It seems like a long time ago now, it's 2018. But one of the things that they used was, mobilizing the rank and file, preparing for a strike a year in advance, and building solidarity in advance in the community, including packing school lunches, because this is a poverty-stricken district, because they wanted to make sure that the families had food for their children, and that didn't become a divide and rule wedge that the district could use, that the Republican legislature could use, dividing the parents and the students on one side and teachers and staff on the other. So those are all elements of a fighting strategy, and we need to see more of that.
I wonder, with you organizing in an academic context, Kshama's speaking to divide and conquer strategies. We saw it in the context of the rail non-strike, the derailed rail strike, the weaponization of the idea that you're gonna miss Christmas presents if the rails aren't on time, and there's all of these desalinated or water treatment chemicals that aren't gonna get where they need to go, and so you won't be able to have potable drinking water, and trying to mobilize the news, trying to mobilize the public to be against the strike on principle, as though it's the rail workers that are the enemy in that scenario. And yet, it didn't really work. Public perception was very much behind the rail workers for a number of reasons that I could guess. One of them being that they are a kind of iconic sort of working person that has a lot more public support than some other sectors. I see, derisive statements made about baristas and things like that, and what they didn't really see about those rail workers. And I wonder what obstacles you face in an academic context, which is often very much maligned in the public sphere for many, many reasons these days. And very active conversations about the merit of higher education and whether or not we should get rid of that department or the other, and CRT bans, and they're indoctrinating our kids, and blah, 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 blah. Do you think that your particular academic context has been affected by those sorts of narratives? And I also invite Chris to weigh in here, since obviously you're close to this as well.
I think organizing in academia and for clarification, our local represent postdoctoral researchers, so we do research mostly, but of course in Columbia University there is adjuncts, there is tenure, there is grad students, there is several other unions, and most of us, postdocs, are actually immigrants, and I think one of the things that was extremely shocking for me, as for many of us, it's what it means, a private university in this country. And I think there is a lot of disconnection to a certain extent, and the university, Columbia University in particular, it's second or first landlord in the city. It's a huge enterprise. It's really exploiting students with charging huge amounts of tuition, but then not really hiring tenure anymore. So it's adjunctifying the teaching area, and then for postdocs, because we are immigrants, because anyway, many issues that I'm happy to talk afterwards with whoever is interested. Really underpay and overworking us, and one of the ways in which I think that Columbia University gets away, it's really keeping us, and I think I resonate a lot with things that Ben and Kshama was saying, keeping us divided, even unions inside campus, when we formed our local, we thought let's connect with SCIU 1199 that are in campus, let's connect with UAW 2110 that are in campus, let's connect with, something as simple that you would imagine that everyone needs on board as let's march together to different Robbie way. Nothing happened. And I think there is a big disconnection, at least from our local, that maybe it's also based in the fact that many of us are immigrants or transplanted to New York City, with the community that surrounds us, right? And we are sometimes seen as, working at Columbia University as, separate for the real people. And I think one of the things that we are trying to do in our contra campaign, and I think it's part also of the entire wave that we are seeing in academia, in higher ed, the University of California postdocs were into strike, the University of Washington postdocs are right now into strike. We've seen grad students going more and more into strike, non-tenure faculty here in New York City. We are seeing in our sector, postdocs at Mount Sinai are negotiating their contract, postdocs in NYU, in Harvard, are forming unions. We are really seeing a lot of workers kind of taking over higher ed. Of course, it's really the spark that really creates everything. It's that we are underpaid, that we are overworked, that we don't have any kind of job security, that we don't know what is going to happen of us in a year. But at the root of everything, it's really a model of higher education that for years has been really bringing money. Like in our case, for instance, we brought last year to Columbia University 1.2 billion with the OS profit in federal research grants, and Columbia has not invested. I think it's only at 26%. One of our finance secretary knows the numbers, but really 26% just back on research. And it's really what you see is that where the money is going is to higher ups, to the president of the university, to these million vice deans that no one really knows what they are doing. And basically they are exploiting us as researchers, bringing money from research grant. It's exploiting the teaching that, they are not tenure anymore, they are in a really precarious position, they are exploiting the students that are paying tons of tuition for a really, teaching mission that is made by adjuncts. And the reality is that in some ways, all this wave of unionization, our own contra campaign, obviously it's just the beginning, but it's part of a wave of really retaking and rethinking what these institutions and higher ed specifically should be for working people. And kind of directly a bit from the original question, but I think that's really, touching a little bit on the question of business, unionism, and working class struggle. I think one of the things that for me more clearly define the question of business unionism it's the fact that it's not using the basic, more powerful tool that we have as workers, that it's working class, basing ourselves in the solidarity, not only inside our union, which of course is fundamental, but also across unions. Right, I think that again, one of the things that we are having in our union right now, we are fighting to get a COLA adjustment, right? Because definitely in the last 3 years, we've seen our salaries go down, and now we cannot afford to live. That's the reality. One of the big difficulties that we have on that is that 3 other unions before us had agreed to just a 3% raise. The logical thing is something that it's absolutely beneficial for every single worker in Columbia University. If you ask me, every single worker in New York City, right? It should have been a battle that we all decide, let's gonna fight it together, right? And I think that that's exactly, one of the things that I think that it's the aim of Workers Who Strike Back, and I think it's obviously something that, anyway, all the different things that have been taught in this panel, but it's there are very basic things that we all want, and the only way in which we are going to be able to win these things is by really, uniting across sectors and really battling together and really making a strategy, not only from now to tomorrow, but actually really thinking beforehand, and how do we put forward our battles all together.
I have to ask you, Professor Hedges, about this announcement that Cornel West is running. He's decided to run with the Movement for the People's Party. I know Socialist Alternative, Workers Strike Back has advocated for a new party, a new third party. There have been questions about why not run with the Green Party. MPP has been embroiled in a degree of controversy over the course of the last couple of years. And I wonder what you make strategically about of that particular choice and how the left should look at it.
Is this off the record?
On the record.
I've been playing with my phone because I set up a meeting with Cornell and the Green Party for tomorrow morning because of the issues you just raised.
Great.
That you would recommend a Green Party run in the alternative, or?
I'm recommending that the Green Party, that Cornell runs as the Green Party candidate.
Yes.
But yeah, I share all your concerns, and just on the issue of ballot access, the People's Party Act doesn't have any. And I, having worked with Ralph in his campaigns, I saw all of the impediments most of the Democratic Party throws to make it impossible for a third party candidate from the left to run. And part of it was challenging his petitions, which were all legitimate, they challenged them in court. They ran up over $1 million in legal fees that Ralph had to pay. So, I mean, just the all sorts of mechanisms. But I share all of your concerns. I mean, and I think that centering, you know, getting, I mean, Howie Hawkins, who I like very much, I mean, he ran not just as a Green Party candidate, he had other smaller parties, but he had other, he was also the candidate. And I would like to see Cornell do the same thing.
One other, you know, aspect of this, and this has come up when we've talked to Kshama, and a lot of people have raised the concern that before Cornel West made his announcement that if you're looking at RFK Jr. and Marianne Williamson or whoever it is, there's a concern that these people tend to run, and Bernie did the same. You run, and at the end of the day, advise your supporters to go ahead and vote for the Democratic Party candidate. You know, Bernie's been criticized for this, Marianne's been criticized for this. It's unclear, RFK Jr. obviously has not been in this situation before. But Cornel West was also someone who did vote for Biden and said that that was the right thing to do to ward off the, you know, risk of a Trump presidency and fascism and all of the things. You know, what do you say to people who are concerned that they don't want to get involved in another political effort, only to be told ultimately at the end of the day that you got to bend the knee and vote for the Dems?
That's a concern of mine. I haven't voted for a Democratic presidential candidate since before 2000. I think Cornell is committed, but I think that, you know, those are legitimate questions that we have to ask. As you know, my critique of Bernie was, and I think this was Kshama's, in fact, Kshama was pressing Bernie to the wall. We were all at an event before the climate march in Manhattan, and Bernie hadn't announced, and I don't think he announced, right?
He was going to.
He was going to, and Kshama kept saying you have to run as a third party.
Mm-hmm.
I loved it. I mean, she was, as usual, a pile driver, pushing Bernie into the corner. And finally, he said, I don't want to end up like Ralph Nader.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that was so revealing to me, because he understood that if he took on the Democratic Party establishment, they would destroy him, just like they did Ralph. And that exposed Bernie. So the whole, and you're right, Pri, I mean, you know, the whole notion of building a political revolution and then going around telling people to vote for Hillary Clinton was a real betrayal. And I was at the Democratic Party, the aptly named Wells Fargo Center. You were probably outside. I was outside with Cornell and 3,000 homeless people, because housing is a human right. And all of those Bernie supporters walked out as Bernie was endorsing Clinton. And Cornell turned to me and said, Bernie lost his historical moment.
Yeah.
He should have walked out with him. But Bernie doesn't want to pay the political price. Remember, people forget, but he campaigned for Clinton on Clinton's re-election after NAFTA. After the deregulation of the FCC, after the destruction of the welfare system. So he has played a very Faustian bargain. It's one that I think he should not have played. And I have pressed Cornell on this issue, precisely this issue, and he insists that he's going to hold fast. But at the same time, if he gets any traction, it's going to get very vicious. And all we have to do is look at what they did to Corbyn. Labour Party did to Corbyn. Who had grassroots support and party
grassroots and party support till they purge it, that Cornell doesn't have. And I worry about it. I mean, I'm gonna be frank, I worry about it. But I talk to him almost daily. He insists he's in for a while.
In Kshama, Chris is saying it's not
No, you don't fuck with Kshama. Fucking with Shama's a bad idea.
It's not that vain, so I won't push you against the wall the way you did Bernie. But hopefully I can have a broader conversation with both of you about what this means. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just reminded, I think another thing that he said, Bernie said, or something like this, maybe I'm paraphrasing at this point, it's been several years, but I think he also said that the reason he doesn't want to run independent, as we were, you and I both were urging him to, was something like that, I don't want to run an educational campaign. And what he meant by that was that I want to run to win, I don't want to run just to make a point on the left. And our response to that was completely proven by events that happened later on, which is that the Democrats are never going to let you win.
Yeah.
You can't run, you can't say you're for a political revolution against a billionaire class and run from one of the parties of the billionaire class. That is never going to happen. In fact, we didn't know exactly what kind of machination the Democratic establishment would use against it, but we knew that they were going to do something because they, of course, it's not like the Democrats wanted Trump to win, but they wanted even less for a working class agenda to win. So they were going to go after him by hook or by crook. And our response to that was, so you're saying you don't want to run an educational campaign because you want to win. The Democrats are not going to let you in, and you will provide wrong education for the working class. And so that's what this is about. I think and it goes back to your other questions as well, Briahna, in terms of, what comes first, organizing or electoral and that sort of thing. So, yeah, I think all of this shows that we don't necessarily see those things as separate. We see that as part and parcel of overall organizing. And so what's really important is, can we have a campaign on the left that, even if it's not likely to win, it actually provides a real, first of all, raises some really fighting demands that can then be used by the rank and file of the union movement, and also can it be the beginnings of an independent party for the working class. That's very important. I just realized I was remiss in not mentioning one very important thing. We've been talking about accountable leadership and all of that. I think a very big component, but not by any means the only component, but a very big component is also, and we've said this through our work in Workers' Strike Back already, and we've always said that to Socialist Alternative, is that the elected representatives, or even the non-elected, prominent representatives of, but especially elected representatives of a working class party or a working class elected representative or union electeds have to pledge to take the average worker's wage. This is a very, very important. And that is basically non-existent, and that is one of the that has to be one of the core principles of any kind of working class party. And as many of you know, the city council pays me about $147,000. And I say about because I don't keep track of my actual salary, because what I take home is only the average worker's wage, and after taxes, all of the rest of the money goes into a solidarity fund that we democratically decide what to do with it. We use it as it's not a mutual fund, it's not a charity thing. It's a question of concretely showing your commitment to the working class that you say you represent, and so that fund is used for strike funds. We have donated to the KCPG organizing drive, and altogether for all of the Amazon organizing, we've donated now nearly $30,000. And so, that's a way of concretely showing commitment. And I just wanted to say, there's a reform caucus that has been announced through the UFCW union, which represents grocery workers and other workers, also Planned Parenthood workers. It's important that such reform caucuses are being formed because it shows that the union leadership is also under pressure from especially younger rank and file. But one of the, they had a convention recently, and one of the demands that this reform caucus put in place was for all the elected, executive members of the UFCW International to take home no more than $250,000. I'm using that as a contrast for what actually needs to be done, because of course, is it scandalous that the executive elected leaders of a union are making well above $250,000, which is $250,000? Of course it's scandalous. But how out of touch do you have to be as a leadership to think that a demand to cap executive salaries at $250,000 is going to resonate with workers, many of whom, according to the union's own survey in California and other states, make so little money that they are homeless and they are living in their cars. So I just wanted to use that as an example, as a contrast between what we have on offer and where we need to go. And so we absolutely need committed leaders, but it's not that it's going to happen in a vacuum, and it's not, we cannot make this a test of individual morality. It has to come from a mass organizing force that demands that whoever represents us has to do this, otherwise they're out.
I just want to add that when you build a militant movement, you don't actually lose. You may lose electorally, but if you look at the history of the United States, it's always third-party political and grassroots movement. Howard Zinn documents this, People's History of the United States, that have opened up a closed system. The abolitionists, the suffragists, the labor movement, when we had the bloodiest labor wars in any industrialized country, which you should go back and study, because these people will be just as vicious now as they were then. Hundreds of American workers were killed, thousands of American workers were blacklisted. They will play by that game. And yet, when you saw the rise of Dems, when you saw the Socialist Party, when you saw the Progressive Party, when you go back and look at the real history of the 1930s with the Communist Party and the radical unions, the Wobblies were gone by then, but the old CIO, they were forces that frightened the ruling elite into, Teddy Roosevelt became a populist only because he was responding to left forces. And that's why Ralph, who saw the corporate coup d'etat, remember, Ralph wrote 24 pieces of legislation, the Mine and Safety Act, the OSHA, he wrote it, and he got liberal members of Congress to pass it. And then he watched as corporations pushed those people out. And his whole argument, which I bought, was if we could get 5, 10, 15 million people to stand in a third party, the Democrats will have to respond. And that's what we have to do now. We have to hold fast to these moral imperatives to frighten. That's the only way they're going to respond. Frighten these systems into beginning to address the grotesque social inequality and the abuse of the working class. That is the only way they will react. And so if we build militant labor movements, and if we build militant parties, which will not have any power unless there are militant labor movements, we may not technically win, but we will win, because we will put them in the place where they should be. I've used this analogy, some of you may have heard it, but I'm going to use it again. Henry Kissinger's memoirs, it's 1971, I believe, the largest anti-war demonstration, tens of thousands of people have surrounded the White House. Nixon has put empty city buses all back end to end, all around the White House, and Kissinger writes about it. They're standing at the window, they're looking at it, and Nixon goes to Kissinger, Henry, they're going to break through the barricades and get us. That's our job. That's our job.
Impressive to hear so much from Bree, from Kshama, Chris, Cora, and Ben. Thank you so much. So what I kind of took from that is how much Workers' Strike Back is going to be a force nationally for building that type of united and militant labor movement that really is going to be essential to the success of any new political formation. It has to have a different, stronger union movement at its core, and I think some of the synergies that we discussed are very, very interesting with Cornell and everything. I think if you're interested in those things, you're in the right place. Stay involved. Make sure you're signed in. We're going to be engaged there. And look, I work in New York City Hall. We know that we could use a lot more people like Kshama, whether it's in City Hall or in state legislature or Congress. In our unions, as union leaders, we need more militant, independent-minded people. So, yeah, I just wanted to say that now. Militancy. So, I'm very excited to kind of keep this momentum going, and I'm so excited actually to introduce the next speaker. With all of the union battles happening across the country, we're going to hear from a couple of the most exciting ones. And Nick is one of the KCVG workers at the Amazon Air Hub in Cincinnati/Northern Kentucky. It's called KCVG, if you haven't heard about it before. And the KCVG Air Hub Amazon workers are fighting for a union. This is the most important union drive in the country, and New Yorkers know a thing or two about Amazon workers unionizing because we are home to the workers at Amazon who successfully organized on Staten Island. So this important union drive, we're now going to kind of hear a little bit more from that. So, if our panelists want to take their seats back, we'll bring Nick up here. Thank you so very much. And let's hear from Nick Hauser. Bring him up.
All right. Hello, my name is Nick. I am part of the organizing committee out of KCVG in Kentucky. Again, fighting for a union out there. Obviously Amazon is the second largest company in the world, corporation in the world, and we need a union there to fight against what Amazon is doing and how they treat us as workers. The air site that we are a part of is the largest and will continue to be the largest air hub in the world. They want to be able to move at least 100 planes in and out of this air site a day. And that's why our location for a union is so key, is the fact that there's no way Amazon's going to be leaving where they're at. They have sunk too much money into it, too much time into it. They're here to stay. We're not going anywhere. Basically, just some backstory. Our union basically started its fight back in October of last year. We learned that we were only getting a measly 50-cent raise that year, and we weren't going to be getting peak pay as well. For those of you who don't know, peak pay is essentially like $2 extra on the hour that Amazon pays during the winter season, holiday time, to incentivize workers to get hired or stay longer hours, that kind of stuff. But we learned we were not going to be getting that last year in October, and so we started with a peak pay petition. We got almost 400 signatures signed, and even after that, management still said no to getting us peak pay. So that's when we realized that without a union at our location, there was never going to be any substantial change. From that point on, we basically built this union up to a launch in mid-March of this year, where we wanted to make sure we had concrete and strong demands as well as a democratic worker-led union. A lot of unions tend to sometimes be a very top-down run. We didn't want that kind of thing. We wanted a worker-led union because we understood that for a union to work, the workers had to be the union. And basically, our three biggest demands that we came up with were $30 an hour starting wage, 180 hours of paid time off, and union representation at disciplinary hearings. These were the main three demands we came up with after multiple meetings with many different people from our site, that we basically all agreed that those were the big three to fight for. Not the only three, but the biggest three that we needed to fight for and stand for. Ever since we started, Amazon has obviously started its union busting and it's lying about our union. They're trying to say things like, we are a business, we are a third party, all we want is dues. In actuality, we are not a third party. Myself and Ray, who you'll hear from after I'm done, we are workers at the site. We work there every day. We're not, it's hard to say that we're a third party when we're in and out of those doors so much. And as far as Amazon calling us a business, in actuality, Amazon is the business. Their only goal is to make money off of people like us.
Right.
That's their whole point. And as far as the dues thing, we have a strong core that we are saying we are not going to start accepting dues until we have a contract. No dues without a contract. And even when we start getting those dues, once we win, once we get the contract, those dues are only going to be put toward things like making sure that the union can function, making sure we can protect our coworkers and all of that kind of thing. And making sure that any staffers that get hired on to help us out are only making the wage of an average wage of a worker at our site. So a little bit of our structure. So we have our organizing committee, which myself and Ray are a part of. We are basically a small group inside the union that leads from the front. We are creating strategies to fight against Amazon and union busting and its retaliation against us. We also have what we call a shop team, which is basically the larger portion of our union. It's the people on the shop floor every day, collecting cards, talking to their coworkers, making sure that everybody knows what's actually happening with the union. The way we've been building this is once somebody gets signed on, they sign a card, we ask them to come to a union orientation to learn more about what we're doing, what we're fighting for, how we got here. And if they want to join the fight with us, they go to a card collector training where they get trained up on how to talk to their coworkers, how to engage with management when it comes down to this, how to get cards signed by the people they work with. As well as we do what we call union tabling, where we stand outside the facility for a couple hours every couple days and just get as many cards signed as possible, and we make sure that our coworkers are getting facts from us and not management. From the start of our launch, our management and Amazon as a whole has been fighting against us as much as they can. The day of our launch rally, they pretty much barricaded the road into our site, only letting people with eligible badges through, which blocked out all of our community support and everybody that wanted to be there at our launch rally, and stopped them from being there. As well as they were telling people on the shop floor that they would get in trouble, they would get written up, they could get fired if they went out to join us at the launch rally. They were also trying to come out and tell us that our union table was a safety hazard and that we needed to move, which we did not. We stood our ground and but the retaliation, unfortunately, did not stop there, obviously. Myself and two other members of our OC were learning ambassadors at Amazon. We were helping train new hires, helping train people on equipment around the ramp and all that kind of stuff. And obviously management did not like that 3 people with union buttons were running around talking to every new person that walked into that building. So they basically told us we were not going to be invited back as learning ambassadors for this year. And so what we decided to do was, during one of the morning stand-ups, we handed in our vests as learning ambassadors to management, gave them an unfair labor practice charge right there in front of everybody, and told them we weren't going to step down without a fight. Something else Amazon started doing is they're hiring seasonal workers, where they bring them on for 11-month contracts, basically with holding this idea of full employment over their heads for that 11 months, and basically steering them away from the union, and basically saying, like, if you're a part of that, you're probably not going to get full hired, so watch out. That hasn't stopped many of them, thankfully. Again, we've still got many, many seasonal workers that are standing with us and fighting with us in this. One of the ways we've been standing up against management a little bit more is we've had a bed bug incident at our site. It was really fun. Yeah, it is not fun. We've had multiple crew vans, which are basically the vans we use to get out to our, from the break rooms out to our place where we actually do our job. Infested with bed bugs has been happening for months. Amazon does not want to do enough to actually get rid of them, so they keep coming back. But on Memorial Day, one of the most recent times on Memorial Day, a team found bed bugs, and management wanted to send them home on Memorial Day with voluntary time off, meaning they would not have been paid for the entire shift, which includes time and a half for the holiday. They would have not gotten any of that. But they stood in the HR office and fought for about half an hour until management finally agreed to get them sent home with their holiday pay. And that just makes sure that with Amazon, the worst thing we can do when fighting them is to underestimate them. And how fiercely they'll fight against us. It's going to take everyone at our site at KCBG, as well as everyone in this room, everyone with ALU, Workers Strike Back, and anybody who wants unions to be more prevalent in the world. It's going to take all of us to fight together to make this happen.
How are we feeling this Friday night? Are you feeling energy? You hear New York City's a union town. I think New York City is a militant union town. We don't want sub-inflationary raises. That's not a raise, that's a pay cut. Our unions need to fight for real raises. Now! Inspirational what they're talking about, $30 in Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky, $30 minimum wage. That's what the cost of living requires now. Why are the big union leaders not fighting for that? I love what Cora said. There should have been a citywide discussion or movement about setting a real wage. So let me introduce next Dante Flores, who's an incredible activist and an excellent drummer, to talk about how we can build and sustain our growing movement in Workers Strike Back. Come on up, Dante.
The reports of my coming have been greatly exaggerated, but I promise you that if we raise enough money, I'll do a really cool drum solo on a Home Depot bucket. Also, forgive me, I made a little bit of a mess of my speech here because all of our panelists and everyone who was speaking made a lot of the points that I wanted to make. So I had to cross them out as soon as these extremely salient points were being made. So I'll make sure to run through these asks as quickly as I can out of respect for everybody's time. Hi there, my name is Dante. I am a member of Socialist Alternative, and I am a volunteer with Workers Strike Back. And I'm here because I think it's urgent that workers have the political means to defend themselves against the bosses. So, having heard today's discussion and having heard from our speakers, and we have some more speakers to come, I'd like to talk to you all now about making a donation to Workers Strike Back. I'm sure you can see volunteers going around, passing out donation cards. We have some lovely volunteers going up and down the stairs. Don't fill it out just yet, because first I'd like to explain how this works. I'm going to list some numbers in just a minute. So when you hear an amount that you can donate, raise your hand. And once you're done with that, fill out your pledge card, and then bring them to our table outside at the end of the appeal. Sound good? Yeah. Great. So, before I start listing these numbers, I want you to take just a moment to think how much you're willing to give in light of everything that you've heard tonight. We're building Workers Strike Back so that we can band together and win some key demands. A $25 minimum wage, rent control, unionizing Amazon, and building a politically independent party that is of the working class, by the working class, and for the working class. So, ask yourself, what is that worth? And given the polarizing conditions that we face in our workplaces and in the environment, ask yourself what you can give, and then ask if you can give a little bit more than that. How much can we raise tonight? 10,000? 15,000? 25,000? So, here comes the first ask. I'm sure that a lot of you broke out your old COVID masks these past few days to repurpose them in light of the smoke that was hanging over the city, which, what a sentence. These capitalists have created this crisis in the pursuit of quick fossil fuel profits. But it's working people who are forced to pay the price with their tax dollars, propping up outdated energy, or with their outdated energy models, or with their lives. It was the same during the pandemic. Corporations reported incredible, cushy profits in COVID's first years. Millionaires and billionaires were able to exploit taxpayer money to recoup costs through sweetheart government loans. Meanwhile, workers died by the millions to keep things running as usual. But you don't go back to normal after that. The bosses, the capitalists, they all know this. And now they're trying to push the costs onto you all, the workers. Inflation keeps climbing, but wages can't seem to keep up. And corporate profits in the billions yield worker layoffs in the tens of thousands. And everywhere you look, the cost of housing is skyrocketing, swallowing up half or more of a month's wages. The bosses also know that workers won't stand for this forever. They've seen the cascading waves of protests, marches, and strikes these past 3 years and are trying everything they can to stop it. So we cannot wait on the establishment to develop a conscience. We have to fight for ourselves. And it's clear that when we do fight, we can win. You know, in Seattle, the very same kinds of working class fighters that you heard from today, Kshama Sawant among them, won the first $15 minimum wage in any major city in this country, plus a tax on Amazon to fund affordable housing, renters' rights, and more. These are real victories. They're won after long and dedicated campaigns waged by volunteers. And Workers Strike Back is just one more piece of the broader struggle, waged once more by volunteers. And we do this ourselves. We print the posters, we maintain the website, and we organize events just like this one. Doing more and building a national movement capable of taking on big business and winning. That's the key thing. And winning takes a serious war chest. So I'm going to start with a big ask here. Can anyone give $1,000 to $3,000 to build Workers Strike Back? If you can, raise your hand. I used to be a teacher, so I'm comfortable waiting and uncomfortable not to die. And I want to add that this doesn't have to be all at once. It can be over successive payments over time. Can anyone give $1,000 to $3,000 to help build Workers Strike Back? So for this next ask, I want to give you a sense of some of our more recent victories. You know, I mentioned the $15 minimum wage, I mentioned rent control, I mentioned the tax on Amazon, but I also want to bring up just one more from Seattle. Workers Strike Back fought alongside South Asian community activists, unions, socialists, and won last February an historic first-in-the-nation ban on caste discrimination with the leadership of Briahna and Kshama Sawant. This fight is desperately needed elsewhere, so much so that calls for similar bans have spread to California and Toronto. And these are exciting developments, and it's going to take stronger organization to expand the fight even further. Workers Strike Back recently launched a national campaign, additionally, to fight Amazon's union busting in solidarity with workers at Amazon's KCBG Air Hub, like we just heard, including campaigns to reinstate Air Hub workers who have been fired for unionizing, right? And part of these efforts have included our volunteers tabling across the country to talk to workers on the street about fighting Amazon's union busting. And we've already raised and donated $8,000 to the KCBG Union Drive, and we have a goal of raising another $10,000 during our prime time to unionize Amazon at Week of Action this July. So things like these are just what we've been able to do in the first couple months. So with more resources, we could be building winning campaigns that set an example for workers around the country, whether it's in the fight against caste discrimination, racism, and other kinds of oppression, winning rent control, or winning union representation and higher wages. Now, this won't be easy, but if we fight, if we're organized, then we can win. Can anyone today give $500 to $1,000 to help build Workers Strike Back?
Right in.
Thank you. So we have a couple hands here in the audience. Does anyone Any last takes before I move on to this next ask? $500 to $1,000. Thank you so much. Thank you. So for this next ask, I want to bring up this Supreme Court case. Just one brief moment that we've been kind of mentioning over and over again throughout this. The Supreme Court case is Glacier Northwest v. International Brotherhood of Teamsters, which, if you're unfamiliar, says that workers are on the hook for any, and unions are on the hook for any profits that are lost over the course of a labor strike, right? It doesn't outright illegalize striking. Yeah, it's terrible. It doesn't outright legalize striking, but it puts an incredible chilling effect on it, right? And that ruling was handed down 8-1, which includes most of the liberal judges on the Supreme Court, right? There was only one of them that voted against it, voted whatever term they use in the Supreme Court. This raises a really important question, and it's one that we've been bringing up over and over and over again tonight. Where is the Democratic Party on any of this? Where have they been these past 3 years? The truth is that they were, are, and will continue to be in lockstep with the bosses. And it was just last December that both major parties, squad among them, voted to break a potential rail workers' strike. So over and over again, Democrats and so-called progressives have refused to fight for the workers the way that Joe Manchin or Joe Biden, take your pick, fight for the billionaires and the bosses. Is it any surprise that they refuse to fight for a $15 minimum wage federally, or Medicare for all, or student loan forgiveness? Where have they been in their fight for abortion rights, or for the rights of the LGBTQ+ community? And the New York Democratic Party in particular, by the way, is not any better than that. They are a cesspool unto themselves. Every single day, our dear Democratic Mayor Eric Adams makes clear his contempt for workers and families by slashing budgets for libraries and school and sending this money over to the police. He makes clear his contempt for the homeless and the oppressed by sending those same police to kick in encampments and perform arrests. And he makes clear his contempt for immigrants by shoving them shoulder to shoulder into gymnasiums and classrooms instead of housing them in the empty condominiums that cover the city like weeds. And our governors are rotten too. We went from one crook in Cuomo to another in Hochul, both of whom have done nothing and will continue to do nothing to improve the lives of working class New Yorkers. And the movements that have put, so-called progressives in office have been allowed to fizzle out in favor of backroom deals in this city and in Washington, D.C. The working class needs real leadership. Real leadership who is unafraid to go toe-to-toe with the establishment of both parties. We need leadership who is unafraid to fight. Can anyone tonight give $100 to $500 to build organizations with this exact leadership? I see a couple hands up here. I see some hands going up over here. I see some going up over here. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Before we go to this last act, do we have any last takers on this last one? $100 to $500. Thank you so much. We got some hands up here, over here, back here. Thank you so much. And I want to make one last point here, so that way I'm not, rambling on as I'm prone to do. Every single dollar counts. Every lone cent that is given to this effort counts, because what this is going to take is every single working person in this room, outside this room, on the street in New York City, state, and around this country, pitching in what they can to help this effort, right? So even if the donation is as small as $1, it is $1 that we take extremely seriously. Extremely seriously. There's nothing more important than that. So is there anyone tonight who can give $1 to $100 to help this effort? Anything? I see a lot of hands going up here. Thank you all so much. We got some hands going up here, up here. Thank you all. Thank you. Any more takers before I move on to the final ask of this appeal and before I start playing a drum solo? So I want to make one last ask, and then I promise I'll be out of your hair so we can hear some more from one of the union organizers. I have it on another page because I looked on script. Find it. I want to make one last ask. Here's me reading from my script. This isn't just one campaign, this is a campaigning organization. And the Teamsters at UPS will be fighting for a new union contract and preparing for a major strike. And longshore workers in California have shut down some West Coast shipping. Writers from the WGA, like we heard from, are currently on strike, and actors within SAG have just authorized a strike with a 97% vote. Right? These are large industries, and it's urgent to have an organization that can take action to help with those fights, right? Whether it's providing political leadership, providing political solidarity, or making donations the way I mentioned that we did before. So most of you in this room has already given a one-time donation. Is there anyone here who can commit to an ongoing monthly donation of any amount, in addition to your one-time donation, $50, $20, or even just $2 a month, to build an organization and sustain it that can fight in the long term? If you could give a monthly donation of any amount, raise your hand. We got a hand here, we got some hands going up around. Thank you all so much. Thank you all so much. We really appreciate that. So like I mentioned before, you all were given a donation card. Now that we've reached the end of the financial appeal, go ahead and bring those cards to the table and we can tally up those totals. I just saw a volunteer over here who was waving his hand up in the air. Thank you all so much. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Give it up for Dante. As soon as the cocktail card comes out.
That's right.
And that's what all the folks who left are missing.
It's going to be a big rush.
I'm making the Manhattans and you're playing the drums. So coming up next, we have a great speech from Luigi Morris, who works at UPS as a warehouse worker. As we've talked about, the Teamsters are really on the cusp of what could be one of the biggest strike actions in American history. Luigi is a member of, as I said, the Teamsters and Left Voice. Really glad to have him with us. Come on down, Luigi.
Hi everyone. So I know it has been a long event. It's kind of late, so bear with me. I woke up 2 a.m. today to work for my night shift. So I'm a bit tired and it was a long, busy day of activities. So as I was presented, my name is Luigi Morris. I'm a UPS worker, a Teamster, a member of the Voice. I'm really thankful for the invitation to this event, Workers Strike Back. And this event couldn't have happened in a better moment, not only because of the massive WGA strike, but also this morning, I and the other workers in my warehouse voted on the strike authorization and will continue next week for the more than 340,000 UPS workers across the country. The UPS contract expires in 52 days. We are like that, we're counting every day. And if some key demands are not met by July 31st, we look forward to going on strike immediately the next day.
Yeah!
This possible strike will be the first national UPS strike since 1997 and by far the largest US labor action in decades. The 16-day strike in 1997 cost UPS more than 500 million in profit. Striking in August for the same period, let's say 2 weeks, would mean an estimated of $3.2 billion. That definitely is the power of the working class. A strong contract, you can only win with a credible strike threat, and most probably with just an actual strike itself, could improve the lives of UPS workers, who are mostly black and brown people, many immigrants like me, especially here in New York City, and this struggle could revitalize the labor movement. Millions of people across the country will be witness to this contract fight, and a good result will encourage workers to fight, especially in the logistics sector, Amazon workers, etc. And as UPS workers, we have many reasons to go on a strike. UPS has been making record profits, over $12 billion in each of the last 2 years alone, granting their CEO over $27 million in just 1 year. All those profits are possible thanks to the hard work, effort, and dedication of UPS workers, essential workers who kept the society running during the pandemic and endured grueling working conditions. That's why some of the main demands are to end forced overtime, like drivers, many of them don't see their families, they spend their break on the cell phone to talk with their wife, kids, because that's the only moment they have. They also want to end the two-tier system, a system that divides drivers into two types of workers, One that can make $30 an hour, and another sector that can make $10 less for doing just the same job. And also the fact of providing air conditioning, especially with all the heat that is going on. And we are fighting for wages increases across the board, but particularly for inside workers. For workers like me, who wake up at 2 a.m. every day, to guarantee that over 20 million packages are delivered daily. Our starting wages are only $15.50 an hour. And while there is no official number about the wage increases that will be asked, and that's something that was brought in the panel, that it's hard to have a clear fight when you don't know exactly what you're fighting for. But there are a sentiment and petitions going on asking for minimum $25 an hour as a starting wage for all inside workers. This would mean an important improvement for our lives, and it could be an example for the working class all over the country. But we know that the road to a strike won't be easy. The recent anti-worker Supreme Court decided in favor of Leisure Northwest against our union, and that shows how the state is willing to put limits in our right to strike. And that's not the only case. The NLRB itself has already ordered the mining workers union to pay over $13 million to the Warrior Med Code for damages and expenses during the strike. And when they say expenses, it also means hiring staff, hiring buses for the staff, and paying private security. Those are the expenses that NLRB is making the union pay. Also, and this also was brought in the panel last year, the President Joe Biden and the Democratic Party has expressed requests of the railroad companies and the bosses, created through the executive order a presidential emergency board to intervene in the negotiations. Later, the Congress, including the so-called Democratic Socialists of the squads, didn't hesitate to impose a tentative agreement to the railroad workers who had voted in favor of going on strike to meet their demands. Neither the Republicans nor the Democrats provide any solution to the working class. It is not a coincidence that these attacks come at the moment where unions have massive support among the union population and there is a new energy in the workers' movement. Our working conditions and wages have been eroded by the economic crisis, the pandemic, high inflation, and profit-thirsty corporations. This is what the capitalist system does. It breaks the value of me and co-workers while enriching CEOs like Carol Tomé, Jeff Bezos, and the like. Their wealth is built on our broken bodies, but we are fighting back. Workers at companies like Amazon, Starbucks, Apple, Trader Joe's, and many others are fighting to unionize the workplaces and get a first contract. In other sectors like education, healthcare, manufacturing, and more, workers are going on strike to fight for better. This generation of workers leave the BLM movement, went through a pandemic and economic crisis, and they are not only taking conclusions against the bosses and the two parties, but also against capitalism, a system that is showing us that it has nothing to offer to us rather than misery, exploitation, and oppression. And next year, and probably this year, after betraying us over and over, the Democrats will tell us we have to vote for them because they are the lesser evil, but we can't vote to these pressures. Our unions definitely need to break the Democratic Party. We can't continue giving the party of strike breakers and oppressors our support.
Right.
We have to be aware that we're fighting against a giant. UPS handled and estimated 6% of the US GDP and 3% at international level. The strength of our picket lines and actions will be an important factor to fight back any kind of maneuver by UPS, like hiring scabs, outsourced work, call the police, etc. And I know that with all the people who is here, we will be shoulder by shoulder, we'll be all standing together in this fight. This situation is also an opportunity for the left and socialists not only to intervene in common struggles and picket lines, but also to engage in the fight for political independence and a working class party of our own that has the perspective of fighting against capitalism and for socialism. And I also regarding to that, I think that any option or alternative that we fight for has to be, clearly anti-imperialist, clearly in favor of immigrant workers, and don't forget that we can get US benefits while spoiling other countries around the world.
Mm-hmm.
not only the history has shown how the Democratic Party is a dead end, but also following reformist projects or trying to humanize capitalism has been proven wrong too. The air pollution we went through this week shows us how dire the situation is. It is evident that the world is at a crossroads, faced with a new phase of capitalist economic crisis, environmental degradation, wars, uprisings, and emerging global struggle. It is imperative that we, the working class of the United States, in the heart of the imperialist war, act now to take our future in our hands, to be an independent working class party that fight for socialism, to begin to transform the situation from one impending catastrophe into one possibility and hope. And while these things can be look so far apart, but definitely the fight, as Kshama was saying, the fight of UPS workers can change the outcome of the US labor movement. Hopefully, we can go on a strike, get a contract that we deserve, and hopefully I see you there when we shut down the, how many facilities? But I'm just here in New York City shutting down the UPS machine. Woo!
I'm going to bring up our final sort of speaker and a half kind of we've got. But I want to introduce next two folks. We've got Ray and Renee. Ray is another KCBG worker who's really going to tell us a little bit about what exactly is coming down the pipe. What can we all do in this room? What can we do as a movement in formation with Workers Strike Back to? Ray's going to cover that, and then Renee is going to close us out. So with that, let's bring down Ray. Come on down, Ray.
Largest air hub in all of Amazon. I got involved with this campaign after the peak pay petition that Nick talked about went around. I watched while the petition was handed to management, and I watched management essentially laugh in their faces, not take it seriously, and I knew we needed something more. We needed a union. So Nick kind of talked about how this all started and why we're all here. I would like to talk about what's coming up for our campaign and what things we're going to be rolling out soon. So the biggest thing and the first thing is that we are rolling out another petition for employees that speak English as a second language to get them translation in our site. Offers absolutely no translation for people that don't speak English as a first language. They create a division between us and make them feel like lesser. It creates safety issues for everyone when people do not completely understand what is expected of them on the job. Our demands with this petition is we want translators for any work-related communication. That includes any kind of trainings as well as disciplinary meetings with HR and management. And we also want union reps in all of those disciplinary. Another very important thing that we will be fighting for is free, widely advertised on-site English language classes for anyone who wants to further their English proficiency during paid work hours on-site. This is extremely important because our union fights for all the workers at Amazon. Yeah. Amazon tries to sow these divisions between us. They have these affinity groups to create a false sense of diversity. Meanwhile, they use these groups to sow more division and to do more union busting. Just recently, we had a situation where Amazon was holding one of their affinity group meetings, Latinos for Amazon. They had all these people come out. They brought food. They were ready to discuss community issues and gather as a group of people. And they canceled that meeting last minute on them because they hadn't trained up one of our managers to effectively do union busting in one of these affinity group meetings. This is the kind of stuff that they will do to create more divisions in the workplace, while us and our union, we're gonna bring the workplace together and make it safe and environment for all employees. Another important thing when we roll out these new petitions and stuff is we want to keep people who've already signed cards and been actively involved in this campaign, and we want them to keep thinking, what else can I do to better this workplace? In Kentucky, it's going to take a huge effort to win this election. Amazon is going to throw everything they have at us to protect their prized possession, their largest air hub, and it's only going to get bigger. But even still, we have to fight and fight for this union because we need it. Amazon will continue to delay the election at JFK 8, and they will continue to try to push us out. We can't just rely on the National Labor Relations Board to hold them accountable. It's our fight to hold them accountable. To get Amazon to recognize us as a union and to recognize the union at JFK 8, it's going to take coordinated efforts at KCBG, JFK, and all other Amazon facilities trying to organize and trying to unionize. It will possibly even take strike action. We are prepared to do that. We are organizing with Amazon Labor Union because they are also Amazon workers fighting for what we're fighting for. We also have Prime Day coming up in July, and what that means for us with Prime Day is that we're going to have more packages being processed, we're going to be working more hours, harder work, potential mandatory extra time that they will throw on us at the last minute, and we will receive no extra pay for it. So we are going to be holding a rally on July 15th. And we are inviting everyone to please come out to this rally. The need for coordination is it's vital, right? It's so important right now to bring Amazon to the table. Our demands with this rally is we want 30 an hour, we want them to stop this union busting, and we want them to come to the table at JFK immediately. Woo! Woo! 79% of Americans support unions. That's the highest in decades. People want unions. The public wants to be involved. ALU and Workers Strike Back can provide an avenue for people to get involved and to mobilize more supporters. We are going to be asking people to donate 30 or more to fight for 30 at Amazon. The labor movement hasn't been fighting hard enough for companies like Amazon. People see Amazon as this untouchable beast that we just can't fight against. It is the way that it is because they're this huge company that has to stop. Amazon is not untouchable. We are going to fight like hell to change the way things have been. Woo! We have to bring the power to the workers at Amazon. Woo! Amazing organizing work and sharing the lessons that you've been learning in your militant fights against some of the biggest bosses on the planet with our audience today. I'm so inspired by all of you here. You clearly have the passion and the energy and the stamina it takes to win. It takes to win a fight like this. I'm Renee Bell. I'm a professor at Lehman College and a member of the PSC CUNY Union. And I'm an organizer with Workers Strike Back. So you just heard from bold and militant workers from across the country, from across sectors, who are part of the academic revolts, who are fighting against billionaires like Jeff Bezos and Hollywood executives, who are on the front lines of an upsurge in labor. More generally, working class people, as we've heard, are increasingly seeking to fight for their demands in the labor movement. But the bosses are taking note, and their fear, like we heard earlier, their fear of the huge potential organizing power of an organized working class has motivated their assault on the right to strike in Glacier Northwest, where the bosses had to, after the workers won their demands, the bosses had to run to the Supreme Court because they couldn't face the workers on their own.
Boo!
And the very same Supreme Court who ruled 8-1 against the Teamsters, they acted with impunity, knowing the Democrats and even most union leaders would give them no pushback, and whose responses ranged from belated alarm to defeated acceptance, saying it could have been worse. We deserve better than could have been worse. We deserve more than the scraps of the fruits of our own labor. And we have to name our demands to fight for them. We deserve a real raise, union jobs, an end to racism, sexism, and all oppression, quality, affordable health care and housing, and free health care, and a new party by and for working people. And build organizing power in our workplaces and in the streets. We have to take the reins and shut down key points of production, like Amazon's KCBG era. And to get there means we need to see real solidarity from the rest of the labor movement. So we invite you to join us, us in Workers Strike Back. We invite you to bring these demands into your workplaces. We invite you to introduce resolutions of support for unionizing KCBG workers. We invite you to join our meeting on July 9th to kick off the Prime Week of Action, a strategic move to hit Amazon during the most profitable time period, Prime Days. So we'll be posting more details about this meeting on our social media and sharing details via email, so please make sure you're signed up and following us along on our socials. Join us continuing to support strikes across sectors. Join us on the picket lines. Join us in the fight against oppression. Here in New York, in the midst of heinous right-wing attacks on queer and trans people, we are mobilizing people to the Queer Liberation March to demonstrate the role that the labor movement can play in fighting oppression. So please join us at the table. Many of us are socialists, but you don't have to be a socialist to be in this movement. Workers Strike Back is not a socialist organization, but a broad movement of working people around a fighting strategy to win our demands. And if you agree, go out, sign up, join our mailing list, come with us to the picket lines. I look forward to seeing you there. The energy tonight has been amazing, and in order to support our work, to support our KCBG workers, we've raised over $5,000 in this meeting alone. In these fights. It's clear that you all understand the urgency of our task and what it takes to win. Let's keep building momentum towards a fight for our demands, because when we fight, we win!